Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. I've been working on Subaru engines for over 2 decades, and here's what I've learned. Not every boxer engine is created equal. Some will outlast the car they're in, while others will have you back in the shop before you've finished paying for the last repair. I've rebuilt hundreds of these engines, from bulletproof daily drivers with 300,000 miles to catastrophic failures that barely made it past 60,000. And there's a clear pattern to which ones hold up and which don't. In this video, I'm breaking down the 4 Subaru engines I'd personally avoid and the 5 that remind me why I love these cars. Whether you're shopping for a used Subaru or just want to know if yours is a winner or a ticking time bomb, this is real-world experience from the shop floor, not internet speculation. Let's talk about which Subaru engines deserve your money and which ones you should leave on the dealer lot. The 4 worst Subaru engines. Alright, let's talk about the engines that keep my bay doors busy. These are the 4 Subaru motors I see come back through my shop over and over again. 4. EJ20G 2.0L turbocharged, the fragile pioneer. The EJ20G is an older engine that I don't see as often anymore, but when one does come through, it's usually for something serious. This 2.0-liter turbocharged motor from the late 80s to early 90s powered the early WRX models and Legacy RS. It's got a cult following in the tuning community, but from a reliability standpoint, there's a reason most of these have been swapped out or rebuilt by now. I rebuilt one of these a couple years back for a customer who'd imported an early Legacy RS. The internals were in rough shape, cracked piston skirts, scored cylinder walls, and rod bearings that looked like they'd been running dry. The engine had barely 90,000 miles on it, but it had clearly been pushed hard. The problem comes down to the fact that this was Subaru's first real attempt at a performance turbocharged engine, and the internals just weren't built for sustained abuse. I've seen pistons crack when people run higher boost without upgrading. The rods aren't forged, the bearings are marginal at best, and the engine management system is primitive by today's standards. That last part is what gets most people in trouble. The old ECU can't adapt quickly enough when conditions change. Temperature swings, altitude, fuel quality. It'll run too lean or too rich, and before you know it, you've got detonation chewing up the piston tops. For someone wanting to build a reliable performance engine, the EJ20G needs basically everything replaced. Forged pistons, stronger rods, upgraded bearings, a modern standalone ECU. You're looking at $5,000 to $8,000 in parts alone. At that point, most people just swap in a newer EJ257 and call it a day. 3. EJ251/EJ252/EJ253 2.5L SOHC, the external leaker. These single overhead cam 2.5-liter engines showed up in everything from early 2000s Foresters to mid-2000s Outbacks and Legacies. I see these come through my shop constantly. And at this point, I can diagnose the head gasket leak before the customer even finishes parking. The difference with these compared to the EJ25D is where the gasket fails. Instead of mixing oil and coolant internally, these leak externally. You'll see crusty green coolant residue forming around the head gasket area, maybe some oil weeping down the side of the block. I had a customer a few weeks back who thought his car had a small coolant leak. Figured maybe a hose was loose. Nope. Classic external head gasket failure on his 2004 Forester at 118,000 miles. In my experience, these failures happen somewhere between 100,000 and 150,000 miles. What usually brings people in is the low coolant light coming on repeatedly, or they notice their driveway has a new green stain. The repair itself isn't cheap because you can't just slap new gaskets on and call it done. When I'm in there doing head gaskets, I'm also recommending timing belts, water pumps, pulleys, tensioners, basically anything that requires pulling the engine to access. Otherwise, you're paying for the same labor twice in another 30,000 miles. I've probably done 100 of these jobs over the years, and the bill usually lands somewhere between $1,800 and $2,800. Front main seals tend to leak on these too. And if the valve cover gaskets are original, they're probably seeping as well. 2. FB25 2.5L, the oil guzzler. The FB25 is a more recent headache that started showing up around 2011. I remember when these first hit the market. Subaru was promoting their new all-aluminum block design and better fuel economy. Fast forward a couple years and I'm seeing these engines come through burning oil like crazy. I had a 2013 Forester in here about 6 months ago, only 78,000 miles on it. Owner was meticulous about maintenance, had every service record since day one. By the time she brought it to me, this thing was burning a quart every 1,500 miles. That's not normal wear. That's a design problem. What I found when I tore into a few of these was defective piston rings. The rings weren't sealing properly against the cylinder walls, which let oil seep past and burn in the combustion chamber. You'd see it in the exhaust too, that telltale blue smoke on cold starts. Subaru eventually admitted there was an issue and extended warranties on some, but that didn't help everyone. I've done probably a dozen short block replacements on FB25S over the years. What's interesting is that even after Subaru replaced the short blocks under warranty, some customers came back a year later with similar issues. The manual transmission models seem to get hit harder with this problem too. What frustrated me most was the inconsistency. I've seen FB25S with 200,000 miles that barely use any oil, and I've seen ones with 40,000 miles already burning 2 quarts between changes. There's no way to predict which ones will fail. 1. EJ25D 2.5 LDOHC, the head gasket nightmare. I've probably pulled more EJ25D engines than any other Subaru motor, and that's not a compliment. This 2.5-liter dual overhead cam engine showed up in late 90s Legacy and Outback models, specifically from 1996 to 1999, and I can spot one coming into my shop from a mile away, usually with a trail of coolant behind it. Here's what I've seen happen time and time again. The owner comes in complaining about low coolant levels, maybe some overheating on the highway. We pop the hood, and sure enough, there's that telltale chocolate milkshake in the coolant reservoir. Subaru used a single-layer graphite-coated head gasket back then, and somewhere around 100,000 miles, that coating just gives up. I had a customer last year who bought a '98 Outback specifically because the previous owner just replaced the head gaskets. 3 months later, it was back in my shop with the same problem. Turns out they use the same cheap gaskets instead of upgrading to the multi-layer metal ones. What makes this engine particularly frustrating is that it's an engine-out job. The whole motor has to come out to do it properly. I'm talking 12 to 15 hours of labor, which translates to $1,500 to $2,500 before parts. These engines also tend to warp the cylinder heads when they overheat, so now you're surfacing or replacing heads, another $800 to $1,200. Most customers at that point start questioning whether the car is even worth fixing. The 5 best Subaru engines. Now let's talk about the engines that actually make me happy to work on. These are the Subaru motors that show up in my shop for routine maintenance instead of catastrophic failures. 5. EZ30 3.0 LH6, the smooth operator. Rounding out my top 5 is the EZ30, Subaru's 3.0-liter flat-six engine that a lot of people overlook. This engine showed up in the Outback, Legacy, and Tribeca from 2001 through 2009. And honestly, it's one of my favorites to work on because they're just so reliable. The first time you drive a Subaru with the H6, you immediately notice the difference. It's smooth in a way that 4-cylinder Subarus just aren't. The balance is perfect, there's no vibration, and the power delivery feels effortless. It makes around 212 to 245 horsepower depending on the version. I've got a customer with an 05 Outback H6 that just rolled over 260,000 miles. Original engine, original transmission, still runs smooth as butter. He brings it in for oil changes and the occasional maintenance item, but that's it. Never had the head gaskets done, never burned oil. It just works. One of the best features is the timing chain instead of a timing belt. That's one less major maintenance item to worry about. The chain is designed to last the life of the engine as long as you keep clean oil in it. I have seen a few cases where the timing chain tensioner gets weak around 200,000 miles and causes a rattle, but that's an easy fix. The EZ30 also avoided the head gasket plague that hit the 4-cylinder engines. In all the years I've been working on Subarus, I think I've done maybe 2 or 3 head gasket jobs on EZ30S, and those were usually due to poor maintenance or overheating from other issues. If you're buying an Outback or Legacy from this era, the H6 model is worth seeking out. 4. FA20 DIT 2.0L turbocharged, the balanced performer. The FA20 DIT showed up in 2015 as a replacement for the older EJ engines in the WRX, and it marked a pretty significant shift in how Subaru approached turbocharged performance. This 2.0-liter motor also powered the Forester XT through 2018, and in my experience, it's been a solid, dependable engine. I've worked on quite a few WRXs with the FA20 DIT, and the first thing people notice is how much smoother and quieter it is compared to the old EJ255. The direct injection and twin-scroll turbo setup eliminated a lot of the lag and harshness. You get 268 horsepower and 258 pound-feet of torque that comes on smooth and stays strong. From a reliability standpoint, these engines have been pretty trouble-free. I'm not seeing the head gasket issues, the ringland failures, or the oil consumption problems that plagued earlier Subaru turbo motors. Most of the FA20 DIT engines I work on just need routine maintenance and they keep running strong. I did have a customer with a 2016 WRX come in complaining about a rough idle. Turned out to be carbon buildup on the intake valves, which is a side effect of direct injection. We did a walnut blasting service to clean the valves, and the engine ran smooth again. That's something to keep in mind. Every 60,000 to 80,000 miles, you might need that service. What I tell customers is that the FA20 DIT is a modern engine that requires modern maintenance. Use quality synthetic oil, change it every 4,000 to 5,000 miles, and don't ignore the check engine light. Do those things, and you've got a reliable performance engine. 3. FA24F 2.4L turbocharged, the modern marvel. The FA24F is Subaru's newest turbocharged engine, and honestly, it's impressive how much they've improved. This 2.4-liter motor currently powers the Ascent, Legacy XT, and Outback XT, and I'm seeing these engines come through for regular maintenance with very few complaints. I started seeing these around 2018, and my first impression was how smooth they are compared to the older EJ engines. The power delivery is linear and predictable. 260 horsepower and 277 pound-feet of torque that comes on strong from low RPMs. That torque characteristic makes these engines feel stronger than the numbers suggest. What I appreciate from a technician's perspective is that Subaru learned from their past mistakes. They addressed the oil consumption issues that plagued the FB25 and built an engine that's both powerful and efficient. Most of the FA24F engines I've worked on show minimal oil consumption between changes, maybe a quarter quart over 6,000 miles, which is totally acceptable. I did see one come in a few months back with higher than expected oil consumption. An Ascent with about 65,000 miles using about half a quart every 3,000 miles. Not terrible, but worth monitoring. The owner mentioned he does a lot of towing, which probably contributes to slightly higher consumption. The direct injection system on these engines is well executed too. I haven't seen the carbon buildup problems that plagued early direct injection engines from other manufacturers. For anyone buying an Ascent or Legacy XT, the FA24F gives me confidence to recommend it. 2. EJ257 2.5L turbocharged, the rally legend. The EJ257 is the engine that put Subaru on the performance map for a whole generation of enthusiasts. This turbocharged 2.5-liter showed up in the WRX STI starting in 2004, and I've built, rebuilt, and maintained more of these than I can count. When they're treated right, they're absolute beasts. I worked on an 06 STI last month that had 180,000 miles on the original motor, still running strong, making good power, compression test numbers right where they should be. The owner was religious about maintenance, used quality oil, and didn't beat on it when cold. That's the key with these engines. Respect them and they'll reward you. What I love about the EJ257 from a tuning perspective is how much power it can handle with the right setup. I've built these engines to reliably make 400 to 450 wheel horsepower with upgraded fuel systems, better engine management, and quality supporting mods. The semi-closed deck block design gives you a solid foundation. But here's where people get into trouble. They buy an STI, slap on a bigger turbo, and turn up the boost without addressing the supporting systems. I've torn down engines where the ringlands just disintegrated because someone was running too much boost on the stock tune. Those thin piston rings can't handle excessive cylinder pressure. Stock, these engines make between 300 and 310 horsepower depending on the year, which is plenty for most people. The power delivery is immediate and exciting, with that classic boxer rumble. If you're buying a used STI, the most important thing is maintenance history. I want to see regular oil changes with quality synthetic, preferably every 3,000 to 4,000 miles. 1. EJ22 2.2L, the indestructible legend. If I could only recommend one Subaru engine, it would be the EJ22 without hesitation. This 2.2-liter naturally aspirated motor from the late 80s through early 2000s is hands down the most reliable engine Subaru ever built. I've got a customer who drives a 95 Legacy with the EJ22. Original engine, 287,000 miles on the clock, and it still runs like it's got half that. He brings it in for oil changes every 5,000 miles, and that's basically all it's ever needed. No head gaskets, no major repairs, just routine maintenance. That's not a fluke either. I see this pattern constantly with the EJ22. What makes this engine so bulletproof is simple engineering. The shorter stroke compared to the 2.5-liter engines means less stress on the internals. And the early ones through 1995 were non-interference designs, which means if the timing belt breaks, you just replace the belt. You don't rebuild the engine. That design feature alone has saved countless EJ22s. I remember doing a timing belt on a 92 Impreza a while back, and when I pulled the valve covers, the internals looked almost new. This thing had 220,000 miles on it, but there was barely any sludge, minimal wear on the cam lobes, and the valve train was still tight. The owner admitted he'd missed a few oil changes over the years, but the EJ22 just shrugged it off. These engines also run smooth and quiet compared to their 2.5-liter siblings. Sure, they only make around 135 to 142 horsepower depending on the year, but that power comes reliably for hundreds of thousands of miles. When you do need parts for an EJ22, they're cheap and everywhere. I've done EJ22 swaps into cars that originally had problem engines, and those customers thank me years later. So there you have it. The 4 worst and 5 best Subaru engines based on over 20 years in the shop. The EJ25D, FB25, EJ251/252/253, and EJ20G have their issues, while the EJ22, EJ257, FA24F, FA20DIT, and EZ30 are the ones that keep me loving these cars. But here's the truth, even the bad engines can last if you address their known issues. I've seen EJ251S hit 200,000 miles with proactive head gasket replacements. And I've seen good engines like the EJ257 blow up at 60K from neglect and abuse. If you're shopping for a used Subaru, maintenance records matter more than anything. A well-maintained car with a problematic engine will outlast a neglected car with a bulletproof one every time. And if you already own one of these, treat it well. Regular oil changes with quality synthetic, attention to the cooling system, and fixing small problems before they become big ones. That's how you keep any Subaru running for the long haul. What's your experience been? Drop a comment with your Subaru horror or success story. And if this helped, hit that thumbs up and subscribe for more deep dives. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.